Mr. Rusbridger, in what sense was the detention of David Miranda either illegal or unjustified?
Well, what happened was a conflation of terrorism and journalism, which is a rather disturbing thing. So what they did was to use a bit of law which relates solely to ports and airport transit lounges to detain somebody for 9 hours and take away all their material in a way that simply wouldn't have been possible had it occurred, say, in the Heathrow car park. And that is quite a disturbing thing.
The Home Office is quite clear. They say that where stolen information, which he was carrying, poses a risk to national security, which it clearly does, they are within their rights, within the law to detain and question.
Well, whether it's lawful or not is something which is going to be challenged by David Miranda. But I think the thing that has disturbed the rest of the world and a lot of British journalists and, to be fair, ordinary British people, is this use of a terror act to detain somebody who was clearly engaged in journalistic activities and seize journalistic material in a way that has no checks and balances. So, as I say, if that happened in the Heathrow car park, there would be bits of the law which would protect journalism. By doing it in a Heathrow transit lounge, there are no protections.
But you're not suggesting, are you, that the material that he was carrying, if it were to fall into the wrong hands, would not be of benefit to terrorists? That's the line that the Home Office is taking.
The material he was carrying was journalistic material, and it hadn't fallen into the hands of terrorists, and there was no evidence that it was going to. On that basis, you could go around arresting all kinds of journalists because they have sensitive material. But that's not the way we handle things in Britain, though it is apparently the way we handle things in transit lounges and ports.
I mean, is David Miranda a journalist? We're told that he's not employed by The Guardian, but he will be receiving support for his legal action from you. He had his flight paid for. I believe he was carrying information that was destined for a Guardian journalist. I mean, he says he's not a journalist, but to all intents and purposes, he was, wasn't he?
David Miranda isn't a journalist. He is the partner of a journalist, and he helps that journalist in the acts of his journalism. And he was carrying journalistic material. So we can get into endless arguments about what a journalist is and what isn't a journalist. Some people want to claim that Glenn Greenwald, the author of a lot of the revelations on the NSA, isn't a journalist because he's a blogger. I think you have to offer some kind of protection or at least discussion and debate to people who are engaged broadly in journalism, which is in the public interest.
Wouldn't the public have more sympathy or greater sympathy for Mr. Miranda if he had simply been travelling in a private capacity? If he had, as he claimed at one point, simply been heading back to Rio de Janeiro to meet up with his partner? In this set of circumstances, he was not. He was couriering information which it is alleged was stolen, information which the Home Office and others within the security services say posed a real risk to national security if it fell into the hands of terrorists.
Well, all journalists, this use of the word stolen is a very laden word, if you don't mind me saying so. This is material that was leaked. All journalists handle leaked material, which is, you could call it stolen, or you could call it leaked, or you could say this is the act of a whistleblower. You couldn't do your job, I couldn't do my job without leaked material. And so suddenly to get very high and mighty and to say this is stolen material and therefore the police and the terror laws have to be engaged, I think is misplaced. What we had here was a responsible attempt to do journalism in difficult circumstances. It's difficult for journalists in the modern world when you know that your phone calls and your emails and all your metadata is available to intelligence services to do journalism and to carry material responsibly. And that was what was going on here.
But is it really that surprising that British intelligence, in whatever form they presented themselves in the departure lounge, chose to stop the partner of a journalist who had obtained information about the UK intelligence community?
I don't know who stopped David Miranda. I don't know who these people were who questioned him. We don't know that. I think what has disturbed people is the use of terror laws, which apply specifically to ports and airports, which allow authorities to detain people for up to 9 hours and to take away material in a way that simply wouldn't be possible if that happened in Heathrow car park, when normal British laws, which do offer checks and balances to journalism, apply.
What you do know, however, are the identities of those within government, perhaps officials, perhaps even politicians themselves, who have been leaning on The Guardian. Your editorial this morning talked of shadowy figures within government who were pressuring you to return the information that Edward Snowden leaked. Who were those individuals?
We had an agreement not to name the individuals, but what I was writing about was the fact that the British government, having engaged in a discussion with The Guardian, came to the point at which they explicitly threatened us with prior restraint. That is, they were going to go to the law to get all this material back and stop us writing about it. That's not something that would be possible in the United States, and that's why we have been forced to transfer our reporting to America.
You did, however, say that one official claimed to speak for the Prime Minister. I mean, you have no doubt, I presume, you have no reason to doubt his claim to speak for the Prime Minister. That in and of itself is a fairly serious allegation. You wouldn't care to name who that particular individual was?
I'm not surprised that this matter, which is clearly about national security and about intelligence, the oversight of intelligence, these are matters of high public concern, so it doesn't surprise me that these were being discussed in the inner echelons of Whitehall and government.
There will be those, however, perhaps even here at Guardian headquarters, who are surprised that essentially you were asked to volunteer the information by persons unknown within government. You refused. They threatened legal action, and you folded at that point before any legal action had commenced. I mean, why did you allow GCHQ officials into Guardian headquarters to smash up hard drives?
The position we were faced with was a protracted court action. Or simply carrying on our reporting, which we are able to do because there are copies of this material in America and in Brazil. It didn't seem to me worth getting into a situation in which we would effectively allow the courts to freeze our reporting and take control of the material in a situation where our reporting could carry on perfectly easily, but just not in London.
But that's the practical side of the argument. There is a point of principle at stake here as well, and one which I would have generally expected the Guardian to uphold, that where governments try to compel material to be released, material which is important to a story, key, central to a story, you would resist that as far as possible, even if you had copies of that information in other jurisdictions.
If it had been the only copy of the material and the threat had been to prevent us from reporting, of course we would have gone to court and we would have fought in the courts. But in the modern world, and digital information being what it is, I think it was a slightly heavy-handed and not very subtle approach by the government to try and destroy one copy in one jurisdiction. Can I just finish? The important matter of principle, I think, is to do justice to the material and to do justice to the debate around national security, around surveillance, and around the rights of ordinary citizens to communicate without government and giant corporations eavesdropping on those conversations and emails and chats.
But you mentioned in your article at the point at which these hard drives were destroyed, one of these GCHQ officials, again nameless, said, now it is time to call off the black helicopters. A jocular aside, perhaps, but there must be those within your own newsroom who think that a precedent has been set, and a dangerous one, that when GCHQ officials dangle the sword of Damocles of legal action over your head, you capitulate and you invite them into the building.
Capitulation would have been to stop writing about it. If you look back at our record, we've carried on writing about it since this happened a month ago, and we will carry on writing about it. So there's been no capitulation. What my article was about transferring the Guardian reporting to a regime in which prior restraint is impossible. So I was trying to make a point about the UK's laws in the light of using this little-known section, Schedule 7 of the Terror Act, to try and inhibit reporting, and I think that's something the public should know about.
What do you think are the broader implications for journalism in this country, given the way in which the government has reacted to the Snowden revelations and, of course, the detention of David Miranda?
Well, I think the broad picture that's emerging from the Snowden material is that no digital communications are safe, that millions of people are now having the metadata or the content of emails, phone calls, text messages intercepted, analysed and stored. And you don't have to think for very long to work out what that means for journalism and the fact that journalism and the confidential relationship with sources becomes very difficult in circumstances when there are so many people who have access to those contacts.
Do you think that, however understandable Glenn Greenwald's reaction was to the detention of his partner, it was entirely wise to start pointing the finger to say to say he had lots more information, lots more documents that could really do damage to the British government, and that they will be sorry that they've carried out this course of action? Do you think that was appropriate?
I think probably there was a bit of English into Portuguese and back into English in terms of the way that was reported. Glenn Greenwald's been extremely careful in what he's reported so far. He's reported a small fraction of what he's seen, and it's all been about policy. He has restricted himself to writing about the relationship between giant corporations, the degree to which any oversight, whether in closed courts or through Congress, is meaningful. These are highly important matters that have led to very narrow debates and votes in Congress and all over Europe. So I don't think anyone is doubting that these are matters of importance which journalists ought to be writing about.
In terms of what has actually been revealed, there are those who are incredibly shocked that anything that is unencrypted is being picked up by intelligence agencies around the world. There are others who would suggest that spies spy, and without a proactive intelligence community, domestically, internationally, we put ourselves in the line of fire.
Well, I think lots of people have reacted to some of the stories saying spy, spy, but I think most people have been amazed at the extent to which this isn't about spying on nations or enemies of the state, but it's about the mass collection of data. People are using Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, their phones, text messages, and I think that has made people very uneasy, particularly in Europe and America, which, unlike Britain, have a direct experience of very disturbing things in recent history to do with surveillance and oppressive law agencies. So I think we're being a bit complacent in this country if we don't think this is a debate which should be had and that we haven't learned some rather disturbing things in the last couple of months.